Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The night had that kind of quiet only rain can bring. Not silence, but a hush, a soft folding of the world into itself. I couldn't sleep. The city outside my small apartment blurred behind a curtain of rain, each droplet a silver thread, sewing together the sound of distance and memory. The clock ticked gently on the wall, steady and patient, as if counting something softer than time. I made tea, jasmine, the one that always smells like the beginning of forgiveness. The steam curled upward, carrying warmth into the air, brushing against the window pane, fogged by my breath. Somewhere beneath that veil of drizzle and lamplight, I thought I heard a whisper. Not a voice, exactly, but something between an invitation and a memory knot. It had been years since I'd walked down the old alley behind this building. Most days it was just a forgotten path between brick walls, filled with moss and the faint smell of damp paper. But tonight, when the rain began, I felt drawn there, like an invisible thread had tugged at my sleeve. The kind of pull that doesn't come from curiosity, but from recognition. I wrapped myself in a wool sweater, the one with the frayed cuffs, and opened the door. The world outside was silver and slow. Raindrops gathered at the edge of the awning before letting go, one after another, like tiny acts of surrender. I stepped out, umbrella in hand, and let the rain speak first. The street was nearly empty. Only the sound of my own footsteps, soft against the wet pavement, kept me company. Streetlights reflected in puddles like quiet lanterns, and the air smelled of wet earth and something faintly floral, perhaps the night-blooming jasmine from the neighbor's balcony. As I turned the corner toward the alley, I noticed how the rain grew gentler there, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The walls on either side were old, their bricks darkened by years of weather. Water ran down in thin streams, carrying dust away in graceful lines. The further I walked, the quieter it became, until all I could hear was the steady rhythm of rain, falling like a heartbeat I hadn't noticed in a long time. That was when I saw it dot at the very end of the alley. Where a wall should have been, there was instead a door, wooden, pale blue, and faintly glowing under the rain. I blinked, wondering if the light from a nearby lamp was playing tricks. But no, it shimmered softly, like moonlight caught on water. I didn't remember ever seeing a door there before. By day, that part of the alley was nothing but cracked brick and ivy. Yet tonight, under the silver rain, it stood quietly as though it had always been waiting. The rain thickened slightly, its rhythm deepening. I took a step closer, the puddles reflecting that ghostly blue hue. My heart felt strangely calm, not afraid, not curious, but expectant, the way one might feel before a long-delayed letter is opened. I reached out and touched the handle. It was cool, smooth, and a little wet. Beneath my fingertips, the wood felt alive, like the door itself was breathing. I could almost swear it sighed when I exhaled something inside me. Perhaps the part that still believed in forgotten magic, whispered that some doors only appear when you're ready to find them. Or maybe, when you're ready to remember the tea back in my apartment was probably cooling by now. My umbrella dripped quietly beside me. I could have turned back, told myself it was just a trick of the light, gone home and wrapped myself in blankets until morning. But I didn't. I stayed there, in the rain, hand resting on the door that shouldn't exist. For a long, slow moment, I simply listened to the rain, to my breathing, to the sound of something wordless but certain calling from the other side. And then, without deciding, I pressed down on the handle. The latch gave a soft click, like a sigh of relief, and the door began to open. The smell that met me was not of the alley anymore, but something else entirely. The scent of rain mixed with warmth, with wood smoke and a faint sweetness I couldn't name. It was the smell of somewhere I had never been, but somehow already missed. I hesitated at the threshold, feeling the cool air from inside touch my skin, gentle as a hand resting on my shoulder. There was no sound beyond the doorway. No city, no rain, no echo. Only a stillness that seemed to listen. And in that listening, I stepped through. The door closed softly behind me, sealing the world of puddles and streetlights away. Ahead, I could see faint light, like dawn trapped in mist. I wasn't sure where I was, but for the first time in a long while, the ache behind my ribs eased. Some doors, I thought, don't lead to places. They lead to moments, to peace you once lost and didn't know how to return to. And in the hush of that thought, the rain kept falling somewhere far away, softly, patiently, endlessly. The door closed behind me with the gentlest sound, like rain brushing across glass. I turned, half expecting to see the familiar alley fade away, and it did. The bricks dissolved into mist, the lamplight melted into pale silver, and I found myself standing before a narrow passage that glowed softly, as if it had been built out of moonlight and memory. The air was warm, but not in any way I'd known before. It carried the faint scent of old paper, cedar, and something like the first breath after crying. I didn't know where I was, but nothing in me wanted to leave. The sound of the rain outside was still there, distant, hushed, as though it had followed me in just enough to keep me company. At the end of the passage stood a door again, though not the same one. This one was simpler. Wood aged to a deep brown, polished by touch and time. A lantern hung beside it, its flame steady despite the soft breeze. The walls around me were covered with ivy, though the leaves shimmered faintly, like they were made of glass. I could hear the soft murmur of water somewhere close, maybe a stream or fountain. I stepped forward, and the floor creaked under my weight. Not the sharp creak of wood, but a living sound like the earth stretching awake. Every step I took made me feel smaller, not in a fearful way, but in a way that reminded me of standing in front of something vast and kind. When I reached the brown door, I hesitated, but it opened before I could knock. Beyond it lay an alley, but not the one I had come from. The air was lighter here, filled with the scent of rain-washed stone and night-blooming flowers. Soft golden lights hung above the street, not electric bulbs, but small, hovering lanterns that seemed to breathe. The cobblestones were wet, but glowed faintly, as though reflecting not light, but memory. It was an alley, yet it wasn't confined. The space felt open, like it stretched beyond its walls, leading everywhere and nowhere at once. There were doors along the sides, red, green, white, each with delicate carvings, each humming softly with a rhythm I could almost feel beneath my skin. Some were closed tight, others were slightly ajar, spilling out faint melodies or whispers. I took a few slow steps forward, my shoes making soft sounds on the wet stones. There were no people, no cars, no signs of a city I recognized, but I didn't feel alone. The air itself felt aware, as if it noticed my presence and approved. I passed a small shop window. Inside, candles flickered, though there was no one tending to them. A clock ticked quietly on the wall, hands frozen at 12. Beside it sat a teapot, still steaming. Got another few steps, and I reached what looked like an old cafe. The door was open, warm light spilling out into the alley. A faint tune, something like a lullaby played on a music box, drifted through the air. I peered inside. The place was small and dimly lit, the air carrying the scent of tea and rain-soaked wood. Tables were set as if for guests who had just stepped away for a moment. Cups half full, books open, coats hanging from chairs. A single lamp on the counter glowed golden, its shade decorated with small painted clouds. "Come in," a voice said, so softly that I couldn't tell whether it was spoken aloud or whispered inside my mind. I stepped in, and the floorboards gave a soft sigh. The warmth wrapped around me like a shawl. On the counter sat a teapot, the same kind as in the window, and beside it, a cup already waiting. Steam rose gently, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I looked around for whoever had spoken, but no one appeared. Still, the feeling of being welcomed was unmistakable. It was the kind of quiet hospitality that didn't need faces or words, like an old friend who knows when to just pour tea and sit in silence with you. I sat down. A chair creaked kindly beneath me. Outside, the rain shimmered against the window, painting streaks of silver that glowed in the lamplight. I took a sip of the tea, warm, floral, slightly sweet. It tasted like remembering something you once loved deeply, and realizing it no longer hurt. My reflection in the window looked softer than I remembered. The lines of worry around my eyes seemed to fade in the misty glow. Then, from somewhere deep in the alley, a bell rang, just once. Its echo lingered like the last note of a lullaby. I turned toward the sound, and through the mist, I thought I saw someone walking. A figure in a long coat, holding an umbrella made of paper. They passed by the window without looking in, their steps light, unhurried. As they moved, the lanterns above them flickered gently, almost as if bowing. And when the figure disappeared into the fog, the teapot on the counter refilled itself, quietly, patiently, as though it knew I wasn't done yet. I smiled, not surprised. I think I understood then. This place didn't obey the rules of time or logic. It moved with the rhythm of rain, opening itself only when the world outside grew too heavy to bear. The door had brought me here for a reason. Perhaps not to discover, but to remember. And so, I sat in that little cafe, listening to the rain hum against the glass, drinking tea that tasted of forgotten peace, until even the clock on the wall began to tick again. The rain outside the window was softer now, almost shy, as if it knew it had already done enough for one night. I watched it trace quiet paths down the glass, each droplet merging into another, finding its way home. The little cafe around me seemed timeless. No sound but the slow tick of the clock, no movement but the faint dance of steam above my cup. After a while, I rose from my seat. The teapot on the counter had gone still, the last curl of steam fading like a sigh. I looked toward the door, and for a moment, I wondered if stepping outside would return me to my old alley. But something in the air told me otherwise. The rain here had its own rules. When I pushed the cafe door open, a cool breath of mist met my face. The lanterns outside swayed gently, their reflections trembling on the wet cobblestones. The figure I'd seen earlier, the one with the paper umbrella, had vanished completely, leaving behind only faint footprints that glowed faintly before dissolving. I began to walk again. The alley wound in ways that didn't quite make sense. Every turn opened to another corridor, another cluster of doors glowing faintly under the rain. Some were wooden, some stone, some made of metal that shimmered like water. I could hear soft sounds beyond them, laughter, wind chimes, a lullaby sung from far away. I passed a wall covered in ivy, its leaves trembling in the rain. There, in the center, another door waited. This one was unlike the others, white, with faint carvings shaped like clouds. The handle was cold beneath my palm, but comforting, the way an old friend's hand might be. When I opened it, I didn't step into another room. I stepped into a street I'd never seen before. The rain here was golden, the kind that glows under unseen lamplight. The buildings were small and irregular, their roofs leaning close together like people sharing secrets. The air hummed faintly, and no kind vibration that seemed to breathe. I realized that my footsteps no longer echoed. They made no sound at all. The ground beneath me was soft, not quite earth and not quite stone, something in between. alive and steady. I turned the corner, and there it was. A long, winding street lined with dim lights, each flickering as though alive. The walls on either side seemed to pulse faintly, like they were inhaling and exhaling. And far ahead, I could see something shimmering, a reflection that moved even though there was no water near it. I walked closer, rain gathering on my hair and shoulders, but never quite cold. The air felt heavy with something beautiful. Not sadness, not joy, but the quiet fullness of being in the right place at the right time. The reflection ahead turned out to be a puddle, shallow, perfectly still, glowing from within. As I crouched beside it, I saw not my own reflection, but scenes unfolding within the water. A city asleep, a woman reading by candlelight, a child walking beneath a paper umbrella, and then me, standing just where I was, watching. I blinked, and the image rippled away. The puddle cleared, showing only the reflection of the golden rain. I didn't feel afraid. Instead, I felt as though the world was gently reminding me that nothing here was separate. Not the rain, not the alley, not even me. Everything was connected, part of the same quiet breath. Further down the street, I came upon a sign swinging softly in the rain. The paint had faded, but the words were still legible. The Crossing of Dreams. Underneath, in smaller letters, enter gently. Leave lighter. There was a narrow archway beneath the sign, and beyond it, I could hear the sound of footsteps. Not hurried, not restless, just steady. I followed them, and soon found myself walking among others for the first time. They were quiet, their faces soft, their eyes calm like open skies after rain. Some carried umbrellas. Others walked bareheaded, smiling faintly at the falling drops. No one spoke, yet everything felt said as I walked among them. I noticed that every person who passed through this street carried something small. A letter, a photograph, a trinket cupped gently in their palms. I wondered if I should have brought something too. Then I realized maybe I already had. Maybe what I carried wasn't visible at all. We reached a wide square, at the center of which stood a tree tall, bare, its branches silver in the rain. Lanterns hung from its limbs, each one glowing with a color I couldn't quite name. They pulsed softly, in rhythm with the rain's steady fall. The people who arrived placed their small objects at the base of the tree. Some smiled, some closed their eyes. When they stepped back, the lanterns above seemed to shine a little brighter. I approached the tree slowly. My hands were empty, but my heart wasn't. It carried years of things unsaid, moments I'd meant to keep, but somehow lost. As I stood beneath the branches, a single drop of rain landed on my wrist warm, not cold, and the lanterns flickered in greeting. I didn't know what to offer, so I simply whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The words felt right. They belonged here, Doc, and for a long moment, the rain held still as if bowing in return. When I looked up, one of the lanterns had drifted lower, swinging gently above me. Inside it, a small flame flickered not orange, but soft blue, the color of memory. It glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed to a steady hum. I smiled, understanding nothing and everything all at once. Perhaps this world wasn't made to be understood, only to be felt. Like the weight of rain on your shoulders when you stop rushing for shelter, Doc, and somewhere, far behind me, I could still sense that blue door waiting patient. Knowing I'd return only when I'd learned to walk lighter, the path from the rainlit square led to a narrower street, quieter still. I walked slowly, letting my hands brush against the damp stone walls. Every surface here seemed to hum with warmth, even in the cool drizzle. The air felt alive, as if the rain wasn't falling from above, but rising gently from the ground. A slow exhale from the dreaming city itself, Doc. At the corner stood a small wooden sign that read, "Tea and quiet lamps." The words alone felt like an embrace. A soft golden light spilled from a doorway nearby. Through the glass, I saw a cozy room, small tables, shelves of books, and teapots of every shape. It felt less like a shop and more like someone's living room left open to the rain. I hesitated at the threshold until I noticed a bell tied with a silk ribbon above the door. It swayed slightly, though there was no wind. When I stepped inside, the bell chimed once a clear, round note that seemed to ripple through the entire room. The air smelled of honey and citrus, of warmth, and time slowed down. A few other visitors sat quietly by the window, their faces peaceful, eyes half closed, as if listening to something only the rain could sing. A cat lay curled in a chair by the hearth, its fur damp and glistening, the color of candlelight dot behind the counter. An old woman poured tea with movements so graceful they looked like part of the rain's rhythm. Her hair was silver and tied in a soft braid. She didn't speak, but when she looked up, her eyes smiled, and that was greeting enough. She pointed toward a corner seat by the window, and I nodded. A steaming cup awaited me by the time I reached it, set upon a tray carved with small clouds. I sat down. The chair was soft, the wood worn smooth by years of quiet evenings. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the glass, making tiny ripples of light on the floor. I lifted the cup, jasmine again, but deeper this time, richer, like it had been steeped in sunlight and memory. The first sip warmed my chest in a way that reminded me of something long ago, sitting on my grandmother's porch, watching summer storms roll in, her voice soft as the rain. The woman behind the counter hummed faintly as she poured another cup for a guest. I recognized the tune, though I couldn't have said from where. It was the melody you hum without meaning to when you feel safe. On the table, beside my cup, sat a small folded napkin. In neat handwriting, someone had written, "Here, time waits for you to catch up." I smiled. There was a bookshelf nearby, and curiosity drew me to it. The spines were faded, but beautiful journals, letters, and thin books without titles. I pulled one at random. The pages were filled with short notes, each one handwritten in different styles. "I forgive you." "I found the photograph." I finally slept. Every page carried something small, but complete, no names, no explanations. Just moments of peace, captured like pressed flowers. I realized then that this wasn't just a tea house. It was a resting place for the things we let go of too gently to notice. I ran my fingers over the paper. The ink felt slightly warm, as though it had just been written. When I returned to my seat, the cat had moved. It now sat on the windowsill, eyes half-lidded, tail curled neatly around its paws. It watched the rain with an expression I could only call knowing. "Do you come here often?" I whispered, feeling silly for speaking aloud. The cat blinked once, then yawned, as if to say, "Only when it rains." The door opened softly, and a new visitor entered, a man in a dark coat, dripping rain but smiling faintly. He nodded to the old woman, who poured him tea without asking. He took a seat near mine and placed something small on his table, a folded letter bound with twine. He didn't open it, just rested his fingers on it, as if feeling the weight of what it contained was enough. For a while, we sat in silence, two strangers listening to the same rain, breathing the same warmth. The world outside the window had blurred into streaks of silver and gold dot. Then the man sighed softly, a sound like releasing something that had waited too long. When he rose to leave, he placed the letter on a nearby shelf among other folded papers. The old woman nodded once, and the bell chimed as the door closed behind him. I glanced at the shelf. So many letters, each tied with care. Maybe this place was where all the words we never send finally arrive. Took another sip of tea and felt something inside me loosen. A knot I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to unwind. The warmth spread slowly, not just through my body, but into my thoughts, my memories. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. I was simply here, present, breathing, whole. When my cup was empty, the cat leapt down and padded across the floor toward me. It rubbed its head gently against my leg, leaving a faint warmth where it touched. "Thank you," I murmured, unsure to whom I was speaking, the cat, the rain, or the room itself. The bell chimed again, though no one had entered or left. Outside, the rain thickened briefly, painting the world in silver threads. I stood, bowed slightly to the old woman, and she nodded in return. No words passed between us. They weren't needed dot as I stepped outside. The golden light spilled onto my hands, and for a moment, I thought I saw the world behind the rain shimmer, not fading, not ending, just folding softly into the sound of the next heartbeat dot. And somewhere behind me, I could still hear that quiet hum, the tune you only remember when you finally slowed down enough to listen. Beyond the teahouse, the street widened into an open square paved with dark stones that glistened under the soft rain. The air smelled of wet wood and candle smoke, of something both ancient and gentle. A light breeze carried faint music, not quite a song, more like the rhythm of rain echoing through hollow lanterns. I walked without thinking where I was going. The world here didn't require decisions. It simply unfolded in front of you like a dream that already knew your steps. My shoes brushed through shallow puddles that shimmered with golden reflections. Each ripple seemed to pulse in harmony with my heartbeat dot. At the far end of the square stood an archway draped with vines. I could see a faint mist beyond it, glowing with soft blues and greens. Above the arch hung a small wooden sign, "The City That Breathes." I smiled. Of course it did. Every inch of this place felt alive, not like the bustling pulse of cities I knew, but a slow, thoughtful breathing. I stepped through the arch, and the air seemed to shift around me, warmer, lighter, filled with the faint sound of water moving beneath the stones. The street ahead curved gently, lined with little houses built of mossy brick and wood. Their windows flickered with candlelight, but I saw no one inside. The rain here was quieter still, falling in thin silver threads that vanished before reaching the ground, as though they were being absorbed by the air itself. I stopped beside a small shop with an open window. Inside, countless glass bottles sat on shelves, each one glowing faintly, filled with what looked like captured rain. The labels were written in looping, elegant handwriting. First breath after storm, silence before apology, the smell of home, long after leaving. I reached out, and one bottle pulsed gently under my fingertips, humming softly. It was labeled, "The Moment You Stopped Running." I smiled at that. Maybe this city collected what the world outside forgot. Moments too quiet for memory to hold dot as I walked further. The path curved toward a canal. Water flowed lazily, its surface scattered with petals. Bridges arched over it, stone, wood, and glass, each one glowing faintly under the rain. The reflections on the water seemed deeper than they should have been, as though they were showing not just the sky, but another layer of the same world. Breathing beneath this one, I found a bench beneath a willow tree and sat down. The leaves hung low, beaded with rain, whispering as they swayed. Across the canal, a paper lantern floated slowly downstream. It carried a faint golden flame that refused to go out despite the drizzle. I watched it drift away until it vanished under a bridge. For some reason, the sight filled me with a quiet kind of hope, the kind that doesn't ask for anything, only reminds you that warmth exists. Somewhere nearby, I heard laughter, soft, almost childlike. I turned and saw a group of figures walking through the mist. They looked weightless, their outlines blurred by the rain. I couldn't see their faces, but their presence felt familiar, as though they were memories instead of people. They carried umbrellas that glowed faintly, illuminating the puddles they stepped through. One of them paused and looked my way. Though I couldn't make out any features, I felt the warmth of recognition, as if someone I had once loved was smiling quietly from across time. Then the group moved on, fading slowly into the mist until only the sound of their footsteps remained, like rain tapping on a distant roof. The rain thickened again for a few minutes, and I sat still, letting it soak into my hair and clothes. It wasn't cold. It felt more like the world's way of washing away the noise that had followed me here. All the hurry, all the unfinished thoughts, all the old anxieties that had built walls around my heart. When it eased, the city exhaled. The smell of wet earth rose, deep and comforting. Somewhere, a bell rang, followed by the faint rustle of wind chimes. The sound traveled slowly, wrapping around corners, echoing down the quiet canal. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost feel the entire city breathing with me. A shared rhythm between rain and heartbeats. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something strange. The droplets on my sleeve shimmered, catching light that wasn't there. Inside each droplet, I saw faint reflections, faces, moments, fragments of memory. A child laughing under an umbrella. Two hands holding a cup of tea. A letter half written, and then they faded, leaving behind only water and warmth. I realized then that this place, this city that breathes, wasn't a destination at all. It was a mirror. Everything here existed because of what we bring with us. Our quiet regrets, our gentle hopes, our softest memories. The rain simply turned them into light. I stayed on that bench for a long while, not speaking, not moving, just breathing. Eventually, when I stood to leave, the willow tree above me rustled, and a single leaf fell onto my shoulder. I picked it up. Its veins glowed faintly, like tiny rivers of gold, and tucked it into my pocket. I didn't know if I was meant to keep it or return it later, but something in me understood that nothing in this world was ever truly taken. Only shared dot, and as I walked back along the canal, the rain began to hum again, a low, steady song, as if the city itself was whispering goodnight. The path curved gently away from the canal, leading toward a narrow lane, lined with small, uneven stones. The rain here was soft as mist, brushing against my cheeks without a sound. The air smelled of old wood and paper, and from somewhere up ahead came the faint rhythm of a typewriter, slow, deliberate, almost meditative dot when the lane opened. I found myself standing before a modest building with a weathered green door and a brass plaque that read, "Letters Never Sent." The windows glowed faintly from within, and beside the entrance, a small wooden box overflowed with envelopes. They were all different, some yellowed with age, some new and crisp, others tied carefully with ribbons. Rain dotted the top ones like delicate punctuation marks. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Ink, rain-soaked paper, and tea. It was the scent of waiting. The sound of the typewriter came from a desk near the back, where a man sat with his back turned. He didn't look up, but somehow he felt aware of me, as though the room itself had whispered that I'd arrived. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with letters. Some were sealed and stacked neatly. Others remained open, pages fluttering softly in the faint draft. The handwriting varied wildly. Elegant loops, hurried scrawls, faint pencil. Marks that looked as if they might disappear if touched. I moved closer, reading fragments as I passed. If I had known how to say it then, I would have. I saw your shadow in the rain today. You are right to go. I was wrong to wait. Each one carried its own quiet weight, but none of them felt sad. They were tender, unfinished, pieces of truth too fragile to be spoken aloud, yet too sincere to be lost. The man at the typewriter finally stopped. He turned toward me with a faint smile. His face was lined but kind, his eyes steady in the dim light. "Welcome," he said. His voice was soft, as though shaped by the rain itself. "Are you here to send or to read?" I hesitated. "I don't know." He nodded, as if that was the most natural answer in the world. Most don't, the first time. He gestured toward a small wooden desk by the window. A blank sheet of paper waited there, along with an old fountain pen. A single candle burned beside it, its flame bending gently in the breeze. "Take your time," he said. "The rain won't stop until you've written what you need to." I sat down. Outside the window, the city blurred behind the rain, soft and forgiving. The blank page in front of me felt heavy, like it already knew what it wanted me to say. I held the pen, unsure how to begin, but the words came easily, like they had been waiting somewhere deep inside me for this exact moment. I never meant to stop writing to you. I just didn't know how to speak without longing. Every time I tried, the ink turned into silence. Maybe that's what distance really is. Not space, but unsaid words. The candle flickered as I wrote. The room seemed to lean closer, listening. I didn't write a name at the top or a farewell at the bottom. Some letters, I thought, are meant to stay open, like doors. When I finished, I folded the paper and sealed it with a small drop of wax the man provided. It smelled faintly of cedar. "Where do I put it?" I asked quietly. He pointed to a large wooden cabinet in the corner, divided into dozens of small drawers, each labeled with words like regret, gratitude, things left unsaid. I looked down at my letter, then chose the drawer marked gentle goodbyes. When I placed it inside, I felt something release in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The man nodded, his smile deepening just a little. "Every letter here finds its reader," he said, "even if the reader is time itself." I looked around one last time. The shelves seemed endless now, stretching farther than the room should allow. The rain tapped softly on the windows, steady and kind. I wondered how many hearts had emptied themselves here, how many silences had found shape in ink. When I turned to leave, the man said, "You can return whenever your words begin to ache again." Outside, the rain was falling heavier, but it felt lighter somehow, the way rain does after you've cried. I stood beneath the eaves for a moment, watching the puddles ripple with the rhythm of falling drops. The whole street seemed to shimmer softly, alive with unspoken thoughts now freed into the air. I took a deep breath. The scent of ink still clung to my fingertips. It smelled like closure, like rain drying on paper dock. As I walked away, I glanced back once more. The green door was already fading behind the mist, as though it were never meant to be found twice in the same way. But I could still hear it, the faint, steady tapping of the typewriter. Somewhere inside, another letter was being written. And I thought, maybe that's all we ever really do, write our way closer to peace. One unsent word at a time. The rain had grown steady again. Not fierce, not cold, just constant. It painted the air with a kind of soft persistence, as if reminding the world to breathe slower. I followed the sound of it down another quiet street, where the windows glowed faintly behind curtains of mist. It was there, at the corner of a narrow lane, that I saw her. She stood by a window of a small, ivy-covered house, her silhouette outlined in pale lamplight. Her hair fell over her shoulders like the rain itself, fluid, unhurried. She wasn't moving, just watching the drizzle trace slow paths down the glass. For a long time, I didn't move either. Something about her presence felt impossibly familiar. It wasn't her face. I couldn't even see it clearly, but the stillness she carried, the quiet gravity of someone who has spent years learning how to listen. The rain softened around her window, the droplets slower there. As if reluctant to fall, I hesitated, then walked closer. The house's front gate creaked softly when I touched it, and the sound drew her gaze. She turned her head slightly, not startled, not wary, just aware dot when our eyes met through the rain-streaked glass. I realized what it was I'd felt all along. Recognition. Not of a person, but of a moment. I didn't know her name. Perhaps I never had. But in that instant, I remembered standing once at another rain years ago, beside someone whose silence felt like home. The memory came without detail, just warmth, and the faint scent of tea. The woman smiled faintly. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the lips, only the eyes, soft, understanding, unspoken. Then, with a slow gesture, she lifted her hand and touched the glass, as if tracing the shape of my presence through it. I did the same. The glass was cool under my palm, but the space between us felt warm. For a moment, the world fell completely still. The rain, the air, even my heartbeat. Only that quiet connection remained, two reflections breathing in rhythm. Then, softly, the lamplight flickered, and the faintest sound reached me. Not speech, not song, but a hum, low and tender. It was the same tune I'd heard in the teahouse. The one the old woman had hummed as she poured tea dot. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from her. The melody drifted through the glass like a memory come home. It was not joyful or sad, but something beyond both, the sound of acceptance. When she finished, she turned away from the window, moving deeper into the softly lit room. I saw her pause beside a small table. There was a cup of tea there, untouched, steam still curling upward. She sat down, facing the rain again, and rested her hands around the cup as if to warm them on memory. I understood then. What this place was showing me, Dot, the city wasn't made of streets and doors. It was made of echoes. Each corner, each light, each breath of rain held something left behind. An apology, a moment, a person, a version of yourself that still waited quietly to be seen. I wanted to call out to her, to ask her who she was, or perhaps who I had been. But no words came. The silence between us was perfect, balanced, sacred. To speak would have broken it, Dot, so I just stood there, under the dripping eaves, letting the rain fill the pauses when language failed. After a while, I stepped back. The woman didn't look up again. She didn't need to. Her presence had already done what it came to do, to remind me that even what's gone can still be kind. When I turned to leave, the rain began to fall harder, as if sealing the moment shut. I walked slowly down the street, and when I looked back, the window was empty. The lamp still glowed, but the silhouette was gone. Yet something had changed. I could still feel her quiet warmth walking beside me, like a soft echo just outside the edge of Sondot at the end of the street. I found a bench under a small awning. I sat down, closed my eyes, and listened. The hum of her song still lingered in the air, faint but steady, a thread of melody woven into the rhythm of the rain. Maybe we meet the people we've lost again and again, not as themselves, but as the gentle calm that visits when we finally forgive them, or when we finally forgive ourselves. I stayed there until the rain softened back into mist. When I stood, the world seemed lighter. The ache that had followed me since the blue door had opened was no longer heavy. It had turned into something else, not joy, not sorrow, just pieced out as I walked on. The sound of the rain seemed to say her name, or maybe mine. But by then, it didn't matter. We had both been found. The rain led me onward, as it always did, not guiding so much as accompanying. The streets grew narrower now, winding between low brick walls covered in moss. The glow of lanterns reflected off puddles like constellations scattered across the ground. I followed them, letting their shimmer decide the way. Eventually, the street opened into a quiet courtyard, circular and still. At its center stood a small building with tall arched windows, their glass fogged from within. Above the door, carved into weathered stone, were the words, "A map of small regrets." I hesitated on the threshold. Something in that name made me smile, gently and sadly at once. A kind of smile you wear when you realize how human you are, how many small things you've carried without noticing their weight dot inside. The room glowed with soft amber light. It was larger than it looked from outside, the air filled with the faint smell of ink, rain, and cedar. Maps covered the walls, thousands of them, some framed, some curling at the edges. None of them showed countries or cities. They were drawn in shapes I didn't recognize. Swirls, spirals, lines that met and folded and disappeared. At the center of the room stood a long wooden table. Upon it lay a single sheet of paper, blank except for a faint shimmer that looked like water catching light. A small quill pen rested beside it. A voice spoke, low and kind. Every visitor leaves a mark. Every mark remembers a moment. I turned, but no one was there. Only the sound of soft footsteps fading deeper into the room. Or maybe just the rain echoing through the ceiling beams. I approached the table. The blank paper pulsed faintly beneath the lamplight. When I touched it, I felt warmth spread through my fingertips. Not heat, but a pulse, like a living thing. And slowly, lines began to appear. They weren't mine, not at first. I saw shapes unfolding, rivers, paths, loops that circled back on themselves. Each one shimmered faintly blue, as though drawn in rain order. As I watched, I realized I could feel them too. Every curve carried a quiet emotion, a decision delayed, a kindness never spoken, a word that had come too late. And the pen lifted itself slightly, hovering as if waiting for permission. I took it gently and let it rest in my hand. The moment the needle touched the page, a new line appeared, soft, trembling, deliberate. It curved once, then paused. A memory surfaced. Not a painful one, but a small ache. I had long ignored the sound of my father's voice the night before I left home. The way he wanted to say something, but didn't. The silence that followed us both for years. I drew another line, looping gently around the first. The ache eased. The lines glowed faintly, merging with the others until I could no longer tell which were mine and which belonged to someone else. All around me, the maps on the walls seemed to breathe. Some flickered, rearranging their paths like living constellations. I saw one that resembled a hand reaching toward another, their fingertips never quite meeting labeled, simply almost. Another looked like a winding river, stopping just short of the sea, titled Too Late. But kindly, I stood there for what felt like hours, adding small lines to the map before me, each one a sigh, a release, a tiny act of letting go. The rain outside played its quiet percussion, steady and forgiving. When I finally stepped back, the paper was no longer blank. It shimmered with gentle blue and silver lines that spiraled into one another like raindrops merging on glass. I didn't understand its shape, but I didn't need to. It wasn't meant to be understood, only felt. The voice returned, closer this time. Every regret begins as a direction we didn't take. Here they find new roads. I turned again. A figure stood near the doorway, now cloaked in gray, their face hidden in shadow. They moved with slow grace, touching one of the maps on the wall with fingertips that glowed faintly. Does everyone draw one? I asked softly. The figure nodded. Some draw with ink, some with silence. You drew with remembrance. It's enough. They turned toward me, and though I still couldn't see their face, I felt the weight of kindness in their gaze. When you leave, they said, take nothing with you but light. The map keeps what you've already released. I looked back at the paper. It had dimmed now, its glow soft as a heartbeat at rest. For a moment, I imagined all those lines mine and countless others connecting somewhere far beneath the city, forming an endless network of gentle regrets, turned to peace dot as I walked toward the door. The air grew warmer. The rain's reflection flickered across the windows, golden now instead of silver. I paused before stepping outside. The figure spoke once more. Remember, even the smallest sorrow can lead you home if you let it walk beside you instead of behind. I stepped out into the rain. The city waited, shimmering softly as though lit from within. Behind me, the door closed, but the words lingered. I carried them with me like a folded note tucked into my chest, weightless. But real dot, the rain fell around me, drawing its own maps on the pavement. Lines that curved and crossed and disappeared a living geography of everything we've ever forgiven ourselves for. The street after the map room was darker, quieter. The lanterns here burned low, their flames steady but small, casting halos of soft gold over the cobblestones. The rain had turned into a fine drizzle barely visible, but always there, like breath against glass. I followed the gentle curve of the lane until I saw a narrow archway marked by a wooden sign that read, in faint handwriting, "The Library of Rain." The name alone made something in me ache pleasantly. I stepped closer. The building was tall but slender, built of dark stone that glistened wet under the lamplight. Its door, slightly ajar, seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the drizzle. From inside came a sound I could only describe as rainfall turned to whisper 1,000 pages turning at once. When I entered, warmth washed over me. It wasn't fire warmth, but the kind that comes from belonging. The scent hit me first old paper, damp wood, and that unmistakable fragrance that always follows the first rain of the season. Petrichor rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the dimness, each one filled with books of every size and age. Their covers shimmered faintly as droplets of light slid slowly down their spines, vanishing before they reached the floor. The ceiling dripped not with water, but with words, faint glimmers of language raining down before dissolving into mist dot. There was no librarian in sight, yet the library felt watched over lovingly so. Each step I took was met with the faint creak of old wood and the hush of invisible listeners. On a small table near the entrance lay an open book, its pages blank except for a single line written in looping script. Take what you need. Leave what you've learned. I brushed my fingers across the paper. It was warm to the touch. The shelves towered high, but somehow I knew exactly where to go, as if the books themselves had whispered directions into the rain. My feet carried me to a quiet alcove at the back, where a single lamp burned softly. A chair waited there, its cushion worn and familiar. Beside it stood a small table with a cup of tea that steamed gently. Untouched dot the book that drew my eye had no title on its spine. Its cover was a muted blue-gray, the color of distant clouds. When I opened it, the pages smelled faintly of rain on stone. Words filled the first page, handwritten, uneven, deeply human. Every memory begins as rain, falling from the mind's sky until it soaks the heart. I read slowly, the way you sip tea when you want it to last. The book wasn't telling a story exactly. It was more like it was remembering one with me. Each page carried a fragment of something I'd forgotten, but recognized in my bones. Moments of stillness, warmth, forgiveness, the sound of footsteps leaving and not returning, the way someone once said your name, as if it meant more than you believed. The peace that comes when you stop trying to make sense of it all. The ink shimmered faintly, like wet letters drying under moonlight. I turned another page and found a pressed leaf inside, a pale green one, delicate but unbroken. Beneath it, a line read, "Not everything that falls is meant to break." My throat tightened. I closed the book for a moment, holding it against my chest. Around me, the library breathed. The rain outside tapped gently on the windows, and for the first time, I noticed how the rhythm matched my heartbeat. Every droplet seemed to echo softly inside my ribs. I stood and wandered deeper between the shelves. Some of the books whispered faintly as I passed. I could almost make out the sounds of laughter, of lullabies, of letters being opened and read aloud. Others simply hummed low, steady tones that reminded me of distant thunder. One shelf caught my attention. The books that were smaller, thinner, bound in soft fabric instead of leather. I pulled one free and opened it at random. Inside, there were no words, only tiny rain marks, circular patterns like ripples frozen in time. But as I stared, the marks began to move, forming faint shapes, faces, hands, moments. It was like watching memories being born and fading at once. Then, as quietly as it had begun, the motion stopped. The final image left behind was of a closed door under rainlight, the same blue door I had first walked through. I traced the outline with my fingertip, half expecting it to feel wet. It didn't. It felt warm, alive. A soft voice spoke behind me, not startling, not unfamiliar. That door opens wherever you remember to listen. I turned, but again, no one was there. Only the shimmer of rain through the high windows and the quiet breathing of the books. Placed the small volume back on the shelf and whispered, "Thank you." At the sound of my voice, the library seemed to sigh, a long, gentle exhale. Somewhere above, a drop of water fell, landing perfectly on the cover of the book I'd just returned. It left behind no mark, only a soft glow that faded slowly. As I made my way back toward the entrance, I realized the open book on the front table had changed. The line I'd read earlier had been joined by another. "When you leave, it will rain where you are. That is how we remember you." I smiled, closing the cover gently. Outside, the drizzle waited, a soft curtain between worlds. I stepped through it, the scent of petrichor following me out like a promise. And as I walked away, the rain began to fall a little harder, steady, patient, writing its own stories on the rooftops of the city that dreams. The path from the library sloped downward, following the quiet murmur of water. The rain had softened into mist again, a veil of cool silver that blurred the world into gentleness. I let it settle on my shoulders as I walked, the scent of petrichor still clinging faintly to my clothes, the echo of the library's hush still inside me. Soon, I heard it, the steady hush of a river, not roaring or wild, but calm, as though it too had learned to whisper. The path opened into a riverside clearing, bordered by tall grass and pale stones slick with rain. A wooden bench waited beneath a willow tree, its long branches dipping toward the water like fingers tracing forgotten notes. I sat down. The bench creaked softly, welcoming. The river flowed in slow ripples, carrying the reflections of lanterns from the opposite bank. Their lights trembled gently, as if unsure whether to stay or to fade into the mist. The air smelled of wet earth and moss. Across the water, I could see faint outlines of rooftops, perhaps another part of the dream city I hadn't yet walked through. Everything here seemed both close and impossibly distant, like memory half recalled upon waking. For a long time, I said nothing. I just listened. The river made a sound like breathing, in and out, steady as a heartbeat. The willow above me shivered softly, scattering droplets that fell like tiny bells onto the wooden planks below. I watched each one break and disappear, small circles dissolving into larger ones, until all became part of the same rhythm. I realized, sitting there, that the river wasn't asking me to understand it. It only asked me to be still. So I practiced the quiet art of letting go. I let thoughts come and drift past like leaves carried downstream, the mistakes, the unspoken words, the lingering what-ifs. Each time one appeared, I imagined it landing in the water, caught by the current, pulled gently away. And as they went, something inside me began to lighten. I thought of the letters in the green post office, the glowing maps of small regrets, the warm tea in the quiet lamps cafe. Each place had asked the same thing of me, to soften, to forgive, to see beauty in what remained. A single lantern floated past on the river then, drifting close to the bank. Its light flickered softly, golden against the gray rain. Inside it, I could see something faint moving, like a shadow of a memory. When I leaned closer, I saw it clearly, a reflection of myself, years younger, sitting by another river on another rainy day. I was smiling in that reflection, not the practiced smile of reassurance, but a real one, open and effortless. The lantern drifted away, its light stretching thin across the water before vanishing around a bend. I leaned back against the bench, a quiet ache in my chest, not sadness, but a deep recognition of how many selves we leave behind, and how kind it is when one drifts back to wave goodbye. A soft sound drew my gaze, the willow branches rustling as something small brushed against them. From the shadows, a cat emerged, sleek and dark, its fur speckled with rain. Its eyes were green, glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Hello again," I whispered, recognizing it as the same cat from the teahouse. It padded toward me, unhurried, tail flicking lightly. Then, without asking, it leapt onto the bench beside me and curled up Dot. Its warmth was immediate, grounding. The steady rhythm of its breathing matched the river's flow, slow and certain. Together, we sat in the soft rain. The cat blinked lazily at the river, and I found myself mirroring its calm. After a while, I spoke softly, more to the air than to it. "How do you stay so peaceful?" The cat stretched, yawned, and rested its head on its paws. If it could speak, I imagined it would say something simple, because I never left the present. The rain thickened for a moment, the sound swelling into a lullaby that filled the whole riverside. The willow branches bent lower, brushing against the water. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the rain, the river, the damp wood beneath me. It all felt sacred, not in a grand way, but in the small, honest way that ordinary peace always is. When I opened my eyes again, I saw movement on the opposite bank, faint figures walking slowly through the mist. They were holding lanterns, their faces soft and serene. I couldn't make out their details, but somehow I knew what they were. The people I'd met along the way, the woman by the window, the man with the unsent letter, the old woman pouring tea. Each carried a quiet light, and as they walked, the river caught their reflections and carried them downstream, turning them into stars upon the water dot. The cat lifted its head, watching. Then it stood, brushed against my leg once, and walked toward the edge of the river. For a moment, it paused, looking back at me. Then, silently, it stepped into the mist and was gone. I sat there long after, watching the rain blur the edges of the world. And as the last lantern disappeared around the bend, the river gave a long, gentle sigh. Or maybe it was Dot, somewhere behind the mist. I could feel the door waiting again, patient as always, not to take me away, but to remind me that every place I'd been tonight, every tear, every silence, every soft goodbye, had already led me home. The rain began to fade. The world grew quieter still. I leaned back on the bench, let my eyes close, and whispered into the damp air, "Thank you." The river answered with silence, the most peaceful sound there is. When I woke, the rain had changed again. It was lighter now, gentler, the kind of drizzle that blurs the line between falling and floating. The river beside me murmured softly, its surface rippling with faint circles of gold from the last few lanterns, still drifting downstream dock. And then, a sound, a small, deliberate one. I turned my head and saw the cat again, sitting under the willow tree, watching me with calm, unblinking eyes. Its fur shimmered faintly under the misty light, dark but glistening, each droplet catching a spark of warmth. It gave a quiet, questioning meow, not demanding, just acknowledging. "You came back," I said softly. It tilted its head, as if amused, then padded toward me with the slow confidence of someone who has all the time in the world. When it reached the bench, it leapt up gracefully and sat beside me, tail curling neatly around its paws. The air smelled faintly of jasmine again, perhaps the scent carried from the teahouse, or perhaps it had never really left. "You've been following me, haven't you?" I whispered. The cat blinked once, which felt like a yes. I reached out a hand, and to my quiet surprise, it didn't move away. Its fur was warm and soft beneath my fingers, the kind of warmth that feels alive, like the last ember of a fading fire. It purred, a slow, steady vibration that seemed to hum in harmony with the rain. We sat like that for a while, just listening. There was no need for words. The world had grown smaller, quieter, wrapped in a calm that felt earned. Somewhere across the river, a bell rang, a single clear note that lingered in the air. The cat's ears twitched, and it looked toward the sound with knowing eyes. "Is it time to go?" I asked. It turned to me again, then slowly stretched, arching its back before hopping down to the ground. It took a few steps, then stopped and looked over its shoulder, waiting. I smiled. "All right, lead the way." We walked together along the riverbank. The mist thickened, curling around our legs, soft and cool. The cobblestones beneath my feet glistened like wet glass. The path wound upward now, climbing gently toward a hill I hadn't noticed before. At the top stood a single street lamp glowing warm and steady. The cat trotted ahead and stopped beside it, sitting down neatly, tail flicking once. From there, I could see the city below, the rooftops, the canals, the quiet alleys shimmering faintly in the rain. It was beautiful in the way memories are beautiful, distant, imperfect, softened by time. The cat's purring faded, replaced by the rhythm of raindrops on the lamppost. I reached into my pocket and found the leaf from the map of small regrets, still golden veined, still glowing faintly. I held it up to the light. For a moment, it looked like it was breathing. The cat looked up at me, then stood and brushed its side gently against my leg. It was an unmistakable gesture, a goodbye, but not the kind that hurts. "Thank you," I murmured. It blinked, then turned and walked away into the mist, its silhouette fading until it became one with the rain. I stood beneath the street lamp for a long time. The rain had begun to ease. The drops were few and far between now, like the world taking its final deep breaths before rest. I felt that same rhythm inside me, the kind that says it's okay to stop searching, that some doors open simply to remind you to be still. Below, the river shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim glow of lanterns drifting lazily toward somewhere unseen. And as I watched, I felt a gentle understanding settle in. Maybe this cat, this city, even this rain, none of it had been separate. They were all reflections of the same quiet truth that had been trying to reach me for years. That healing doesn't always arrive as thunder or revelation. Sometimes it comes quietly, in fur and rain and stillness, in the simple act of sitting beside something that asks nothing of you. I closed my eyes, listening to the final notes of the rain. My breathing matched it naturally. In, out, in, out. When I opened them again, dawn was beginning to form behind the clouds. The gray was thinning, soft threads of pale light weaving through. I could see far in the distance, the faint outline of the blue door glimmering at the end of the street. Waiting, smiled. It was time. The rain was almost gone now. Only a few drops fell, slow and deliberate, like punctuation marks at the end of a long letter. I began to walk down the hill, each step lighter than the one before. The city seemed to exhale as I passed. The lanterns dimmed. The windows closed softly. The puddles rippled once and stilled. It was as if everything here knew its purpose had been fulfilled, to teach me how to rest, how to carry quiet with me. When I reached the alley where it had all begun, the door was waiting, pale blue, glowing faintly in the first light of morning. I paused before it, my reflection wavering in its wet surface. The sound of the river lingered behind me, a soft hum beneath the silence. For a moment, I rested my paw on the wood. It was warm. "Good night," I whispered. The handle turned easily, as if recognizing my touch. And when the door opened, the first light of a new morning spilled through soft. Golden, patient dot the moment I stepped through the blue door. The rain faded to a whisper, not stopping, only softening like a melody retreating into the distance. The light changed, too. It was no longer the silvery glow of dreamlight, but the golden warmth of early morning. I found myself standing once again in the alley behind my apartment, though it looked different now. The walls glistened faintly, washed clean by the night's rain. Small puddles mirrored the first hints of sunrise, turning the gray stone into pools of quiet fire. The door behind me was still there, pale blue, calm as the sky after a storm. For a long moment, I simply stood and looked at it, half expecting it to fade. But it didn't. It just waited, breathing softly in the still air. I touched it gently, tracing the edge of its frame. It felt solid, real, yet lighter somehow, as if it no longer belonged entirely to this world. When I looked down, I noticed droplets on my hands, glimmering faintly before they sank into my skin, leaving warmth instead of dampness dot in the pocket of my coat. I felt the soft outline of the golden-veined leaf. I took it out. It hadn't wilted or faded. The veins still shimmered faintly in the new sunlight, though now the glow came from within rather than from the rain. I turned it between my fingers, smiling at how fragile it looked and how strong it was to have survived the storm. I began to walk back toward the main street. The city was waking. Faraway traffic murmured like waves. A kettle whistled in some unseen kitchen. The smell of bread and earth filled the air. But beneath all that was something else, a stillness that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been there, waiting for me to notice dot at the corner. I passed the cafe where I used to stop each morning before work. Its windows were fogged, the way glass fogs when warmth meets cool air. Inside, the barista was wiping the counter, humming softly, the same melody I had heard in the teahouse. I smiled without meaning to. I ordered my usual tea and took it to the window seat. The rain had left faint trails on the glass, catching the sunlight like threads of silver. I watched them as I sipped jasmine again, with just the right amount of sweetness dot outside. The alley looked utterly ordinary now. No lanterns, no doors glowing with rainlight, no sound of distant bells. But if I squinted, I could almost see a shimmer, faint and fleeting, where the blue door had been. And I knew that even if no one else could see it, it was still there, patient. Like the feeling of peace that lingers after a long exhale, a cat appeared outside the cafe window, dark-furred, tail curling lazily, eyes half-lidded with that same knowing calm. It sat for a moment, meeting my gaze through the glass, before padding away into the soft light of morning. I laughed quietly. "I see you," I whispered. The barista looked up from the counter. "Did you say something?" I shook my head. "Just talking to the rain." They smiled knowingly, as if that made perfect sense. After I finished my tea, I walked home slowly, letting my shoes splash through the last of the puddles. The world looked freshly written, the kind of morning that feels like a blank page. Birds were beginning to sing, and the air carried that clean, rare balance between warmth and coolness. When I reached my apartment, I set the golden leaf on the windowsill, beside the small potted plant I had nearly let die last month. Its leaves were pale but alive, stretching faintly toward the light. I poured it a little water, whispering something like an apology, or maybe a promise. The rain outside had truly stopped now. Only the dripping from the eaves remained, slow and rhythmic, like the last few notes of a song. I stood by the window, watching the city wake, the gray roofs shining, the air washed of yesterday's dust, everything quietly beginning again. And I realized all those places I had seen, the teahouse, the library, the alley of dreams, they weren't separate worlds. They were rooms inside me, long locked and waiting for rain to find the key. Maybe that's why the door appears only when it rains, because rain reminds us how to soften, how to let things through without breaking. On the desk by the window, a small notebook lay open. Its pages were blank, save for a faint ring where I'd once placed a cup of tea. I picked up my pen and began to write, slowly, carefully, letting the ink curve the way raindrops do when they fall. Keep small rituals. Light a candle when it storms. Drink your tea slowly. Forgive what was heavy. Listen for the door. The page filled quietly, the pen moving like breath. When I finished, I closed the notebook and left it open beside the golden leaf. A reminder, maybe, or a continuation. Outside, sunlight slipped through the thinning clouds. The puddles on the street began to fade, leaving only reflections that shimmered before disappearing. The air smelled of earth, of beginnings. I stood there for a long while, hand resting on the windowsill, feeling that calm stretch through me. I thought of the man in the post office, the woman by the window, the old tea lady, the cat, the door. Each had given me something wordless, small anchors for quiet nights. And in that moment, I knew what I would keep. A warm cup, a folded letter, the sound of rain, and the certainty that gentleness can survive anything docked by the next evening. The rain had returned. Not heavily, just a quiet, steady drizzle that turned the air soft and silver. It slipped down the window in thin threads, blurring the city lights into gentle halos. I sat at my desk, watching it fall, a cup of tea steaming beside my hand. The notebook lay open, the same page from the morning, catching the lamplight. The words I'd written, keep small rituals, forgive what was heavy, felt truer now, not as instructions, but as a way of remembering. The golden leaf still rested on the sill, its faint glow mirrored in the reflection of the rain dot outside. The world had slowed again. Cars moved through puddles with softened sound. Umbrellas bloomed like quiet flowers. And somewhere far off, a wind chime sang faintly between gusts. I thought of the city behind the rain, the one with the glowing lanterns and the breathing streets, and wondered if, somewhere out there, the blue door was open again. Maybe it was. Maybe it always is, for someone who needs it. The thought brought a small, unexplainable comfort. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the rain. It wasn't the same rain as before, and yet it was, just as each heartbeat feels new and familiar all at once. I could almost hear it speaking, in that language without words that only rain knows. You're here. You're still here. You've come home. A soft tapping interrupted the thought. I turned toward the window. At first, I saw nothing but water streaks and blurred city lights. Then, through the ripples of glass, I saw movement, a flicker of blue. My chest tightened gently, not in fear but recognition. The reflection of the door was there, pale, shimmering, the same soft hue as a cloud caught in moonlight. It wasn't on the wall, not in the alley, just there, within the rain itself, like memory taking shape. And with it came the faintest sound, a whisper, almost too quiet to notice. It wasn't calling me back. It was simply saying my name, as if to remind me that it remembered. The sound dissolved as quickly as it came. The reflection faded into silver streaks again, but the warmth stayed. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of tea and rain and wet earth filled the room. It felt like every quiet moment of the night was reaching inward, settling softly in my chest. Somewhere in the background, my clock ticked, slow, patient, like the heartbeat of an old friend. I thought of how many nights I'd spent before like this, restless, waiting for something unnamed. But tonight felt different. I wasn't waiting for anything to arrive. I was simply letting things be. I sipped my tea. The warmth spread through me, a gentle current beneath the skin. On the street below, someone laughed faintly, a real sound from the world beyond the window. It made me smile. I imagined the library again, the shelves glowing faintly with rainlight. I could almost see the book I'd held, its ink shimmering with the words. Every memory begins as rain. Perhaps somewhere inside that library, another page had turned. Perhaps the city was still alive in its own quiet way, breathing through every drop of water that touched this world. The cat's image flickered in my mind. Too, those calm green eyes, that silent companionship. I wondered if it was still walking the streets beyond the rain, curling up under the soft light of another window. Maybe it was watching someone else tonight, keeping them company the way it had kept me. I smiled again at the thought. The rain always knows where to send its messengers. On my desk, the pen rolled slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand. I picked it up and opened the notebook to a blank page. Without thinking, I began to write. There's a door that only opens in the rain. Some find it by accident. Some are called by name. It doesn't lead away from the world, but deeper into it, into the places we forget to look when we're dry and hurried and unlistening. If you ever hear it, the sound of a latch, a sigh of wood, a whisper through the rain, don't be afraid. It's not another world waiting for you. It's the same one, made gentler by remembering. When I finished, I laid the pen down. The rain continued its slow song outside, steady and forgiving. I closed the notebook, then looked again toward the window. My reflection was faint in the glass, blurred by the water running down its surface. For a moment, I thought I saw another reflection beside mine. A woman's, her features soft, eyes calm, like the one I'd seen by the window in that dreamlike city. She smiled, almost imperceptibly, then vanished with the next streak of rain. I didn't startle. I just whispered, "Good night." And maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was the rain answering, but I could have sworn I heard a quiet reply. A hum, the familiar tune from the teahouse, carried softly through the sound of water dot. I stayed there until the tea cooled, until the last of the candles burned low. When I finally rose and turned off the light, the room was wrapped in a darkness that felt warm, not empty. The rain kept falling, gentle, patient, alive. Before I went to bed, I glanced one last time toward the alley through the window. The blue door was gone, as I knew it would be, but the rain still shimmered in its place, like a curtain drawn over something kind dot, and that was enough. That night, the world seemed wrapped in a deeper hush. The city lights dimmed one by one, fading behind curtains of mist until only the soft shimmer of rain remained, endless, patient, like a lullaby the earth had been singing forever. I lay in bed, listening. The sound filled the room the way light fills a cup, slowly, tenderly, until there was no space left untouched. Each drop against the window was a thought, a memory. A heartbeat that my body was still, but my mind wandered. Not restlessly, the way it once did, more like a slow drift down a quiet river. I thought of all the places I had seen beyond the blue door. The tea house of quiet lamps, the post office of unsent letters, the map room of small regrets, the library that braved with the rhythm of rain. Each one had given me something, and now I carried them not as burdens but as warmth. On the windowsill, the golden leaf still glowed faintly in the dark. Its veins pulsed with a soft, slow light, a reminder that even the smallest things could hold eternity if you looked gently enough. I closed my eyes, and in the half-light of sleep, I saw the city again. The rain fell in sheets of silver. The streets gleamed like veins of light. The doors along the alley shimmered open one by one, each leading to somewhere kind, laughter, forgiveness, peace. And through it all, the blue door waited at the end, glowing softly, as if it were smiling. The cat was there too, sitting beneath a lantern. When it saw me, it stood and stretched, tail curling like a question mark before brushing against my leg. Its eyes held that same wordless knowing that nothing is ever truly gone, only changed. Together, we walked down the alley, our reflections merging with the rain. The city around us exhaled, lanterns flickering, windows glowing, the soft hum of wind weaving through narrow streets. It was alive in the most peaceful way a thing can be alive, not pulsing or loud, but simply being. We stopped at the river. The surface was calm, carrying hundreds of floating lights, lanterns drifting slowly downstream, each one bearing a name, a memory, a wish whispered softly to the rain. I knelt by the water and dipped my fingers into it. The surface rippled, and for a moment I saw my reflection not as I was, but as I had been, a little younger, a little lonelier, staring into the rain and not yet knowing what peace felt like. I smiled at that reflection and whispered, "You made it." And she, the old version of me, smiled back. Then the ripples closed, and she was gone, carried away on the current of light. The cat leapt lightly onto the bench beside the river and began to purr. The sound blended with the rain, with the hush of water, with everything. I sat beside it, letting the world breathe around me, that there are goodbyes that end things, I thought, and goodbyes that begin them. This was the second kind. The rain grew softer, the city fading into light. I could feel the edges of waking pressing closer, the weight of my blanket, the hum of the heater, the smell of morning, not far away. But I didn't rush back. I wanted to stay here a little longer, in this quiet world where the rain made everything whole again. I looked up. The clouds above were thinning, revealing faint glimmers of dawn. A pale gold began to spread through the mist, and the raindrops caught it like tiny sparks. The blue door appeared once more at the end of the alley. Open this time, waiting not for departure, but for return, thought the cat nudged my knee gently, as if saying, "It's time." I stood. The ground beneath me shimmered faintly, every puddle reflecting a piece of the sky. I took one last look at the river, at the drifting lanterns, at the city of rain that had held me with such grace. Then I turned toward the door that it stood, calm and unhurried, its paint glistening wet, its frame breathing faintly with light. As I stepped through, I felt the rain brush against my shoulders, a benediction, a promise. The sound of the river followed me for a moment, then faded. The air grew warmer, filled with birdsong and the faint smell of wet grass. Morning had come. I opened my eyes. The rain outside my real window had stopped. The city beyond was washed clean, shining in the newborn light. Everything looked the same, and yet not quite. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. On my desk, the notebook lay open. A single droplet of water, or maybe something else, had landed on the page, right beside the last line I'd written. Listen for the door. I smiled, touching the spot lightly with my finger. It shimmered, then vanished, leaving no trace. I poured myself a new cup of tea, letting the steam curl upward like a small offering. The golden leaf caught the morning light, glowing faintly, faithfully. And in that stillness, with the city waking and the rain retreating, I felt it again. That gentle presence, like a memory too kind to fade. Somewhere beyond sound, I knew the door would always remember my name. The next morning dawned with a brightness so tender it felt like an apology. The air outside the window was cool and clean, still carrying the faint scent of last night's rain. Sunlight spilled softly across the room, tracing warm lines across the wooden floor, glinting off the rim of my teacup dot. It had been a long time since I'd woken to this kind of quiet. Not the silence that aches, but the kind that listens. The golden leaf on the sill caught the light, glowing with the pale shimmer of something almost breathing. I stood by the window for a while, watching the city stretch itself awake. The streets below were still damp, the puddles reflecting a sky too new to be blue. The hum of life was beginning again. Footsteps, voices, the faint rumble of buses in the distance. And yet, underneath it all, there was still that other rhythm, the one that rain leaves behind. Slower, softer, more forgiving. I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth touched my chest, spreading like sunlight inside. The jasmine scent lingered, and for the first time, I realized how much it smelled like comfort. Not of a place, but of belonging to yourself again. The notebook still lay open on my desk. I had fallen asleep before writing more, but the page didn't feel unfinished. It felt waiting, patient, the way a garden waits for someone to return. I picked up the pen and wrote, almost without thinking. When morning learns to listen, it sounds like rain remembered. The words came easily, as if they'd been whispering all night in the corners of the room. I added a few more lines, each one arriving as softly as a raindrop on glass. You do not lose what the rain has touched. You only learn to carry it differently. Every quiet moment is a doorway. Every breath is a homecoming. I set the pen down, smiling. The clock ticked gently beside me, marking time not as something passing, but as something present. Outside, a bird landed on the balcony railing, shaking droplets from its feathers. For a moment, the air was full of tiny rainbows, fragments of light caught between wings. I thought of the dream city then, how its streets had shimmered the same way, and how every place within it had taught me to listen a little better. The teahouse with its humming warmth, the post office that held words too fragile to send, the map room where every regret found its place, the library that smelled of rain and forgiveness, the river that mirrored my reflection until it no longer hurt to look, and the cat, quiet, steady, reminding me that peace is something that returns when you stop asking for it. I didn't need to go back there. I carried it now, in the stillness of mornings like this, in the sound of rain when it begins, in the simple act of being gentle with the day. The sunlight shifted, stretching across the desk. I noticed something glimmering faintly on the window pane, a single droplet that hadn't dried yet. Inside it, for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a reflection, the faint outline of a door, blue and bright, before it faded into the light. I whispered, "Thank you." The droplets slipped down the glass, leaving a clear, shining trail behind. The world outside was fully awake now. Someone laughed on the street below. A delivery bike splashed through a puddle. A curtain fluttered from a window across the way. Ordinary things. Beautiful because they were ordinary. I closed the notebook and placed my hand over its cover, feeling the slight warmth from the sunlight. The golden leaf glowed beside it. The two together like small anchors of memory, reminders that healing doesn't need to be loud to be complete. I took one last look at the sky. It was no longer gray, but not entirely blue either. Something in between, a quiet color that felt honest. Clouds drifted lazily, and in their shapes, I could almost see the outlines of doors, windows, teacups, and rivers dot the kind of world that listens. And as I stood there, a breeze came through the window, cool and soft, carrying the faintest scent of rain still lingering in the air. It brushed against my skin like a familiar voice whispering, "Rest now. You've arrived." I smiled, closing my eyes. The world exhaled with me. The leaf trembled faintly in the light. And somewhere, maybe in memory, maybe in dream, the city of rain breathed once more, its quiet heart still pulsing between drops. The blue door would open again someday, I knew. Maybe not for me, or maybe for the parts of me still learning to listen. But for now, the morning was enough, that peace was enough. I turned away from the window, the scent of jasmine still in the air, the golden light warm on my hands, and as the rain's echo faded from the edges of hearing, I whispered a final thought, not to the city, not to the cat, not even to the rain itself, but to the gentle quiet within. I'm home now. The room listened, and the morning answered, not in words, but in stillness, and that was all I needed.